You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to Trek FM's local books and comic show. And I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And I am so excited to be coming at you here as we are going to be doing something very special. We are going to do something we've never really done, which is to do a retrospective on a series that's come out and talk about it amongst ourselves as the hosts. And so to do that, I'm really glad to have with me, as he is so much of the time, the one, the only, the beautiful Bruce Gibson.
No, you know, I've seen more than one Bruce Gibson on Google because I've Googled my name before, and I think I'm an attorney in some state. And
oh, really?
Yeah, I've been around for a while.
But are they more beautiful than you?
No, because they don't read Star Trek novels, and you gain beauty from Star Trek.
Wow, I had no idea. No idea. Well,
you've been looking better each time you read a book, Matt.
Apparently. I mean, I must be looking great this year because I read a lot of Star Trek books being back on Literary Treks. And I'm so excited to have with us here is none other than Casey Pettitt, who reads a ton of Star Trek books and therefore looks better than both of us, Bruce.
He's beautiful.
Look at me.
Absolutely.
Our listeners just wish we had a video feed now.
That's right.
Yeah, they're probably thinking themselves that they don't because they've, actually seen our pictures online, and they're like, no, they got voices for radio, so or podcasting. But we are super excited because we had the Coda series come out last year, and well, I say last year because as we're recording this, it is going to be last year by the time this episode drops, which is the first of the new year. So this is our gift to you, and something we've never done this before, where we're going to kind of talk through a series, and it's so monumental. We figured, well, it needs more conversation. So before we get there, just want to remind you, you could find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating and review. You can actually now rate us on Spotify as well. So if you're a Spotify user, head over to the app and you can give us a star rating there. We'd really appreciate that. You could find us, of course, online, all over the place, on Twitter at TrekFM. Of course, we're on Instagram at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference. You can join listeners from all over the world talking about everything we've got going on here in the network. Trek.fm, our main website and hub online. And, of course, you can send us an email at trek.fm/contact. Choose a show, choose Literary Treks, and that can come to us. And we want to say a huge thank you to our associate producers through Patreon. Patreon is the place where you could support the network and make sure that everything keeps coming to you. It was a very lean year for us, honestly. And we could really use your help. And we've got great associate producers here on Literary Treks. One of them is with us, Mr. Casey Pettitt, as well as Greg Rosier, who also helps support the network through Patreon. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM. If you want Trek FM to be able to continue in 2022, then we really do encourage you to do that at patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, guys, this show is so unique and different. We have no news, so I don't know. Why don't we just head into the feature and give our Coda to Coda? Okay. So this is going to be something we've, again, I've said it twice already, but it is very different. We've never really done this before. We've talked about a series, but this was so monumental. The idea of bringing what we came to affectionately call the litverse coming to an end. And with this coming to an end, I wanted to ask both of you how you were feeling when, one, you realized Picard was going to ruin it all, and two, when they then announced finally that what they were going to do with the literary universe was use a book series to bring it to a conclusion.
Well, I remember when Dayton and David, I can't remember which one, said there's a plan. I remember that tweet that went out. We have a plan to do something with this timeline to end it. And I didn't necessarily think they were going to go in this direction. I just thought that they would do one last trilogy or novel or something that just wraps up some storylines, and then we're just done with this timeline, and then we move forward with whatever continuity happens with Picard. So I wasn't expecting them to destroy the timeline. And then as we were getting more information about it and developments about this, and that seemed to be the direction they were going. And you may have heard me say this before in other places and here, and that is that I don't believe the timeline will be destroyed. I felt like that was just like what they were leading us to believe, and then they were going to do something that then resulted in the timeline not being destroyed. Well, they fooled me. So there you go.
Yeah, I wasn't... I don't know. Yeah, after watching that first episode of Picard, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, they better have a plan. Like, if they're going to do something. And I'm glad they followed through on that, because if you read through their afterwards in each of the books, they talk about how they didn't want to just send this to the legends, I guess, of, similar to Star Wars or something like that, and just kind of leave it alone or leave it on a big cliffhanger or anything. And yeah, I thought maybe they would do something just to tie up loose ends, maybe even do some sort of timey-wimey stuff to get everything to line back up so that we would be in the same universe. I didn't think they were going to go quite as far as to say, yeah, that this is just an alternate universe, which is essentially what we got. But yeah, I don't know if it gave me what I expected or not. It's definitely not what I. It was a roller coaster of emotions for sure. What they ended up giving us.
When you said that, it just reminds me of being or watching Anchorman. He's like, "Oh, I'm stuck in this glass cage of emotion." Yes, absolutely. I think listening to both of you kind of talk about where you were, it is interesting because I thought it was an interesting idea. And yeah, I mean, the moment they announced the Picard series, I knew the litverse was screwed. It just was. There wasn't. It was the same thing with them announcing they were going to do episode 7, 8, and 9 for Star Wars. Like they're not going to keep this. They're not going to do anything. It's going to die because. In all honesty, I mean, tie-in fiction is only meant to support what's on screen. That's what it does. The uniqueness for both Star Wars and Star Trek is that they had been the sole arbiters of what was happening with your characters for a good 20 years. And so that's why people were so in love with them, and for good or ill. And, we've talked on the show, especially as been going to the 24th century books, we haven't covered the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think, of the decisions that they made for that. And I think that I want to ask you guys this question, because kind of coming to the idea of the end, they mentioned many times they didn't want this to be a Legends situation. But, the problem is that Legends for Star Wars ends in a very good place, in the sense that the Crucible book, whether you like it or not, is a book that kind of wraps up the storyline for Luke, Han, and Leia in a mildly satisfying way. Like it leaves them all in a good place, and yes, there are many storylines, and our friend Mark Hurleman, Bruce, could rattle off 40 of them that we're still continuing that he would want to see continued. But everybody in the universe kind of was at a good place, and it was a decent end. Like, if there was no more, it didn't kill you. Like, you know, in the sense that you could then still continue to make up ideas in your mind of where those characters would go and all of that kind of stuff. And so I guess part of me wants to challenge the idea that it was a bad idea to just let this die in the first place without having an actual end, because does it necessarily, did it have to have an end? I guess maybe that's the question I'm trying to ask.
Well, for me, the answer would be no. I didn't need an end. I didn't need to have this trilogy. I'm not saying I don't enjoy or appreciate this trilogy was done, but if it didn't happen, I'd be okay with it. Because as you're saying, like with Star Wars Legends, you know, that Crucible book came out, I think, right before the whole Disney thing happened anyway, because they were going into a new direction with Jaina Solo and kind of going to the next generation, which then they stopped once the Disney thing happened. But I guess the way I look at this continuity of novels is that it would be the same thing to me as if we didn't get another Kelvin timeline movie. It takes place in another timeline. I don't need a fourth movie that destroys the timeline so that I can understand that this timeline's done. Like, it's fine if it ends where it ends right now. And, you know, I would have been fine if these books ended where they ended. Because, and actually in some ways I would prefer it, because I would know that maybe somewhere down the line we can revisit this timeline, you know, and maybe even have it connected within the Picard storyline. If anything, I was more disappointed with Kirsten Beyer, who started the Picard series, that didn't go in there and say, hey, this is what will work, and it would still work for the most part with the novel continuity.
Yes.
You know, she threw it out the window. So, but I so appreciate them saying, hey, let's put an end to the timeline, but at the same time it's sad because it's destroyed, right? So you're seeing these characters we followed for 20 years die, and did we need that? I don't know, but I don't care because I enjoyed it. It's just, this is a story they wanted to tell, and I'll take it.
Well, not only did everybody die here, they never existed in the first place. By the end of the book, they completely unraveled the timeline, and I know that, you know, when this was coming about and people were kind of getting upset about how the novels were going away, and, you know, I think both of you probably had said on both your podcasts about how, well, the books are still on my shelf. Like, they're not disappearing. You know, I can still go back to these anytime. I mean, what we've essentially done in these books is say, not so much that it was all a dream, but, you know, that's kind of where they went. Like, literally, they went back to the beginning of this time, this splinter timeline, as they call it, and erased it from existence. So, like, as if they had never existed before. But the benefit that we have is that we get to still read all these. And, you know, I'm a bit of a broken record that I haven't read all of the books leading up to this yet. But so I can't say whether or not I would have preferred this to not have, you know, ended everything or not. But I guess I'll, you know, just say that I appreciated these books for what they were and what the authors were trying to do, as far as somewhat of a love letter, I guess, to the readers that have been reading for, you know, these nearly 20 years and reading all these books.
Well, and I prefer that they did do it ultimately, because then it gives us that thread and that connection to this prime timeline that we're seeing on screen. We do have some connection there. So the answers are, you know, this is a different timeline. We know how the timeline started, how it connects to the prime timeline. And even though it's all destroyed, there are some elements that come out of this that can affect the timeline. For example, the Borg learn about their evolution in this timeline, and they're multidimensional. And so therefore they could avoid in the prime timeline the events that happened in Destiny. You know, so having little breadcrumbs in there like that, and Picard having visions of himself in different timelines, can inform him in the prime timeline too. So I appreciate having those connections that we wouldn't have gotten if we didn't get some kind of closure trilogy like this. So I would say then I prefer that this did happen.
Mm-hmm. I think, Bruce, one of the points that you made up that I think is really strong was just the idea, obviously, you killed this timeline, literally, and there's no way to ever return to it. And it is interesting because the Kelvin timeline is in a completely different timeline, and who cares,
Well, so is Star Trek Online, the comics, they all didn't fit together.
Yeah, and so I understand the thought process of them deciding to do this and making the choice to do it, and so I think for me coming into this and the idea of when I compared it to Legends, it does seem interesting and different, and it seems as though, like you said, they made a choice, and so there's nothing I can do about it. It's the same way. It's like we've talked about many times. They made choices with Cisco that I can't stand. Like, I can't change that, right? So it is what it is, and so at this point, I think it's going to be interesting to kind of talk through, the series itself now. And, to me, Moments Asunder was really interesting because, and when I talked to Dayton here on the show, he mentioned the idea that starting off the book in a way that where you're helping all of these people kind of like see where they could be going if we weren't going to kill everyone. It was basically almost wish fulfillment. And it's funny because now as I look back to Moments Asunder and I think of where we end up, it does make it even more devastating because that's what I want, really. Like, as a fan, personally, I would much rather have this continued because I really did want to see where these characters were going to go. And in many ways, like people talking about Legends and that's their Luke Skywalker, this is my Picard. Like, this Picard is so much more interesting than what we get in the show, which is a pale comparison, and in many ways, I think talking to all the authors about this idea of like where they brought Picard in this book series was the ultimate challenge for Picard, right? Which is to open himself up to have a family, and it makes him a better man, it makes him a better captain, and it just makes him a better person overall, and I think, when I think of Moments Asunder now, that's the thing that really sticks with me is like all the places they could have gone, Oh, the places you will go, the places you will go and the places we'll never go now. And it does, it kind of breaks my heart.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of going back through my notes in the first one too, in Moments Asunder. And just in the first, in part one of that book, we've got various crew members on the Enterprise considering leaving. Like Geordi was considering going back to, I think, Utopia Planitia to become a starship designer. Teresa Chen was considering leaving, and I think to go to a California class ship to work on second contact missions. And, and when they're at the starbase, Picard's on a beach and feels the happiest he's ever been. We are kind of getting things set up almost like a What You Leave Behind situation from Deep Space Nine, where, Miles goes off to teach at Starfleet Academy and, people are kind of going their separate ways. The book actually starts off kind of like that with, kind of setting that up. Like everyone's considering kind of changing the status quo a little bit.
It's like the final episode of Friends and any other sitcoms, but everybody's going their separate ways in the last episode, just out of, coincidence. And we start to see that here. But yeah,
I think in some ways they're obviously, and Dayton is specifically doing this, to kind of rip our hearts out even more, on purpose. And I think it's a good setup. And in all honesty, I probably would have done something similar if I had been writing the series in a way of saying like, this is where you could project in your mind as a fan where these characters could be going in the future, like if we had a future. And so I mean, I liked that, and again, it is I would say it's a bitter pill to swallow because I don't love Picard, the series. Like, I've liked the books that they've given us. I thought that those have actually been better than the series itself. But I don't like Picard in that series. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but how do you feel?
Hero.
And how do you feel about the preferred Picard being dead?
Well, it hurts, like, because to me, this was the logical progression, and of all the characters, I would say in the extended timeline that they gave us, I guess minus, because Voyager doesn't really play into this at all. So that's a whole, I mean, that's definitely a completely different discussion. But just from the characters we got here, like, Picard was probably the best written and the best, to me, the best progression that we got. Like, what they did with him and Beverly was phenomenal. It's the very thing that the TNG never had the guts to do. And it's the thing that, obviously Deep Space Nine had the guts to do, which was to allow its characters to get into relationships together and move on with their lives, and the books finally gave us that for Picard. And so, yeah, that being gone, Bruce, thanks for, while you're at it, why don't you give me this paper cut and pour some lemon juice on it?
Well, I got more to do with that because I was thinking about, is this the best decision that they made to do a book like this? And I think it's more acceptable because we know that they can't write in this continuity anymore because of what's happening on screen. So We're already accepting of that. But just imagine if you were watching The Next Generation as it was airing and you get to the final episode and then you find out that the last 4 seasons were in a splinter timeline and they're going to have to destroy everything. They're all going to die at the end. And so really what happened in the last 4 years, we didn't see. The last 4 seasons were in this timeline that has now gone away. There would be so much uproar from people and say that's like the worst Star Trek ending ever because we just wasted 4 years of it. But we don't feel that way about the novels because we know why it's been done that way.
Sure.
But from a storyline perspective, if you were doing that, for example, in TNG, we would hate this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do we like it because we know the situation, or or should we hate it? And I'm not saying I hate it, but I'm just putting that out there, that thought.
And I think the thing that's hard when they're doing a TV show, and if they were to do that, and there's a lot of TV shows that have done that, where an entire season turns out to be a dream or something like that. And
right.
I think the ultimate question
We're
becomes
lost.
like,
you're actually in purgatory.
Exactly.
St. Elsewhere. Yeah. Dallas.
Yeah. But I mean, the thing that we lose when we're watching those shows is that character development, because if you undo an entire season of a show, you really got to take those characters back to where they were at the season before that. But with these characters in the books, we're getting this kind of finite conclusion, and because of the whole C word with the canon of being what's on TV, and now we've got to conform to that. Nothing is lost on these characters. Yeah, we're saying it's a splinter timeline, and it just I just appreciate that the authors just kept the character growth going even through these books. I mean, the characters continued to grow, and I think once we got to Spock, and I think the second book where he's like convincing people like this is the right thing to do. We don't want to do this, like the destroy our timeline, but we have to because it's the right thing to do to save. When people could have just said, well, who cares about the prime timeline? What if it gets destroyed? We're going to get destroyed anyway. But we get to watch these characters grow throughout this series and to the ultimate end of, their character arcs.
And that's the beauty of these books, because when you watch Picard or Lower Decks or any other series that comes after this, you can look at it and say, this timeline would not exist if our heroes from this one didn't save it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's the effect. So it's a good tie between these tie-ins and to the prime timeline.
Right. And And I just, as the devil's advocate, then if you're on the other side, you're like, well, screw the Prime timeline because it sucks now. So like, I want what we had, like, well, so I think that's that's the hard part about the whole thing is like, you have to sacrifice something. And again, in the end, just like with, Star Wars did, and tie-in fiction in general, this is just how it works. It's always going to be sacrificed on the altar of what's on screen. That's just the way it works. And so, but like you said, Bruce, it just doesn't make it any less difficult, because I think that was a great way to bring it up, is that you are losing all of that character development, really, that you loved so much, from characters and the way that they developed, right? And so, and I think, having mentioned this before, but it's like, yeah, I am sad because the character development of Picard is gone, but at the same time, the benefit of that is that the development for other characters that I wasn't as big a fan of is undone now. And, like, as far as I'm concerned, Bashir and Ezri are happy together somewhere, like.
Right, but will we ever get that story
yet
in the Prime timeline now? I mean, we'll have it now in this timeline, but will that ever be told in the Prime timeline?
And so, like, there's the trade-off. Which I think is that's the interesting conundrum, So, obviously, too, we A Moment's Asunder does reveal a part of the threat, and a part of the threat is the Davidians and their insatiable appetite for universes, and not only universes, but the pain and suffering of universes as they collapse. And so, did you guys like that? Did you guys think that this was going to be the final villain of the series, or did you always suspect that there would be, somebody else that's responsible?
Part of me did wonder part of the time if Q was going to show up. I think he's mentioned, I think in the first book, that they consider it could be him, but I think even Picard says it just didn't seem like something Q would do, like with whatever was going on. I was happy with the choice of the Davidians. It's a race that would have been interesting to see more on screen, I guess, but even as they describe in the books, they kind of thought that they had dealt with the Davidians and their time travel nature and soul sucking nature. So I thought this was just like a really good kind of scary race to have, and they were able to add some nuance and some kind of new aspects of these aliens that we didn't get to see on Next Generation. And I'm glad they didn't have some other bigger power behind it, and also glad too that they didn't just create a new threat that we've never seen before, because otherwise why would we care so much, I guess, just because there's this universe ending threat out there, and then it just seems like any of the new Star Trek series anymore anyway.
Yeah, well, that is true, isn't it? I would have been fine if they created something else, because it still means that the universe is being destroyed, and it doesn't have to be from something familiar to me or not to really give me that, sense of danger of what they have to face. But I appreciate them using the Davidians because they haven't been really used in the litverse or in the comics. I think just briefly once or something. I mean, so they were ripe for the picking to do something like this with. I didn't expect there to be any other baddie in this. I expected them to be the ones throughout. I wasn't surprised when I was reading the first book that they were being used, because I read that they were in the synopsis of book 3, which I read that synopsis before I read this book. And then I'm online and people are like, I was surprised it was the Davidians. I'm like, oh, that was supposed to be a surprise. I guess I was already spoiled on that, but it didn't ruin anything for me. It just made me more curious to read it. And, the fact that they're sucking souls and they can do timey-wimey things and all that. It's perfect for this kind of trilogy.
I really thought that it was a good choice, mainly because it was non-expected, and I think that was the thing that I really enjoyed the most. The fact that this was not a villain that when anybody was thinking of Star Trek villains, that this would be it, and I like that. We, at that point, we weren't dipping back into any well that we had been to before, and to me, that was smart, and at the same time, I also personally believed that it was smart to not just create something new that, like, oh, okay, like this was diving back into Star Trek lore and creating something out of what had already been, and at the same time, making them even more terrifying than they'd ever been, and to realize too that, and I think this was one of the things that I thought was really smart, is that they've been working on this ever since what happened in TNG, that they have been figuring out a way to get what they want, and once they got it, now nature abhors a vacuum, and they are the ultimate Hoover. They're just willing to suck up as much pain as possible, and they found the best way to do that is to create splinter universes that allow them to, suck up the entire universe's pain at one time. And so I liked that. And in all honesty, I thought the idea of just ultimate consumption being your drive, and no stewardship was really interesting too. I mean, it's a great Star Trek kind of thematic element, I think, that works as well. So, to me, those big points for book one, I think, worked. Was there anything else that stood out to you in moments of Asunder that you either really liked, or was there anything that you were like, it didn't kind of live up to expectations for you starting off the series?
I think I liked the destruction of the Guardian of Forever up front, because it kind of set the chess pieces to show that, we're going all at it. This isn't gonna be something easy, and just bringing Wesley into this and his big part in this trilogy and how that's set up in this novel was great, because, having recently read in the last couple of years the Time 2 series, and it kind of plays off of where we left Wesley there and bringing him forward here and having these abilities as the Traveler. And to what Casey was saying earlier about Q, for example, I had an offline conversation with Dayton where, CBS gave them the directive, do not use Q, do not use Guinan. And I'm glad they gave them that directive, because sometimes I feel like Q is used a little too often in situations like this.
Yes.
So I was glad that he's kind of put off to the side. It would have been kind of cool to see Guinan, though, for this, but
she's name dropped a couple times.
Yeah.
But we don't know where she is.
No, but we know she died at the end, right? Because they all did.
Like everybody else.
But and then we got some deaths, Not, what I really liked about this book, and I think I said it at the time, was that the pacing. Like, I really expected, it's like everything's just being destroyed. There's all this action and we're going from scene to scene to scene, but we pretty much stay with the Enterprise crew throughout, So it felt more like a full book to me that just focuses on a core set of characters, and I really like that.
Well, yeah, with the deaths that we had, I mean, obviously Ezri Dax being the big one, but there's also a lot of litverse characters in there that died too, and because the Aventine does play a good part in this as well. But yeah, I like, like you said, the pacing throughout this book was really good. It's setting everything up, giving us the sense, like especially at the very first chapters with the Guardian of Forever and Wesley, and witnessing this and knowing that Wesley's on some sort of mission. It sets that kind of immediate. I don't know, kind of just that hook for the book to get you to wonder what's going on. And then throughout the book, it does a great job of just leaving these little kind of nuggets of information between, like, Worf's dreams at the beginning, which have to do with his I think what they start calling temporal multiple personality disorder, and then Riker kind of having the same issues, starting to have the same issues, where he's envisioning himself as the captain of the Enterprise D, and I think that's from the universe from one of the prior novels, like Headlong Flight, I think, or something. But and just kind of sowing the seeds for these things that are going to play a much bigger part as the books progress. And so it just ramps up the energy until you get to the end when Dax dies, Teresa Chen dies. And that one actually I felt was a little bit more difficult even than Dax's death, because she didn't die right away. She just gets super old to the point that she just is too old to live anymore, like, and actually could experience some of that. But
well, there are times I was questioning, wait, did Dax just die? Did that just like, there were times I wasn't even sure if someone actually died, or there's a flash of light. It's like, or was Dax sent somewhere else and we just think Dax died,
Yeah. You don't get to know until a little bit later that, oh no, okay, yeah. She's gone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think for me, Dax dying killed me. I hated it. And I'll never forgive Dayton. Of course, she was going to die anyway, but... and I know, obviously, we'll talk about it in a second, because it plays into what's going to happen in the next book, and obviously that death is really pivotal for what we're going to do with characters. But there's a part of me that's sad that she doesn't get to be in the rest of the books to just help out and be there. Like, that's a character for me, I love, and I would have liked to have just been able to spend more time with before she's gone, Is
there any of the core characters that you would have preferred died instead of Dax to really set that stage?
Well, that problem is that there isn't, for what they're going to do with there's no other character that's, and I guess we can jump to it with the Ashes of Tomorrow, but no other character's death is going to mean as much to Bashir and be the thing that you could feel like would snap him out of the malaise that he's been in. Just no other character is going to do that, right? And I think, and that's, and I'll say for me, and I'll just right up front, to me, still the best book in the series is The Ashes of Tomorrow, and mainly that's because I feel like we get the most heart out of all of the books, because this one really deals with the emotional ramifications of what's happening for the characters I'm the closest to in this series. We really get a sense, obviously, with the Deep Space Nine characters, as well as even the Enterprise characters, when with Picard and them, when they truly realize what they're up against, and the fact that there is no answer other than we've all going to die so everybody else can live. And so you put that together, and like, this book had me wrecked in a way that none of the other two books, like, there are parts in Oblivion's Gate or, moments of Asunder, but this book just, there were multiple times I was honestly, I was tearing up, because it was just like so heart-wrenching.
Yeah, I would agree. The Ashes to Tomorrow definitely would be my favorite book. I think for all the reasons that you just said. There is one or two scenes in Oblivion's Gate, I think, that really that were very emotional, I guess. But The Ashes of Tomorrow definitely did have the most. It brought in the Deep Space Nine characters. And I think, if I remember on the interview with James, he said that this was the first time he had written the Deep Space Nine characters, which was surprising to me, because I felt like all the voices were right on, and did a great job with that. But this is kind of an Empire Strikes Back situation, where you got such a great, like, middle chapter, I guess, of a trilogy that I don't know. This book really left me wanting for more at the end, like, really get into the third book of the series, just because so much happens. They find out so much, but also realize, they knew they were up against the Davidians in the first book. They knew what was at stake, but this one really just kind of brought everything together, I guess. And really set the stakes pretty high, and then more deaths and everything too.
More deaths.
More deaths. It took me a moment. I had to think for a little while. I was like, wait, what all happens in this book? Because it's been a couple months since I've read it. And now I'm remembering. Yes. We get introduced to the Deep Space Nine crew at the start of this book. So as the first book, as we were talking about, it really focused more on the Enterprise crew. And now we're introducing the Deep Space Nine crew into the fold of this. And yeah, the way things play out on the station, that brand new station, no longer around anymore. Mm-hmm. And, Ro and Quark together one last time. I enjoyed that. They died together. And what happened to O'Brien and Kira's reaction to that. All those things that were happening at the end of this book, were really powerful, really emotional. And just the last line or the last page showing that they're going to another universe in the next book was kind of exciting to get that little nugget to show, where we're progressing to next in the next book. But yeah, there was a lot of drama in here and a lot of loss. And is this the book? No way, it's the next book. See, yeah, I'm getting them confused. Yeah, it's the next book. I'll get to that later.
Bringing in all the Deep Space Nine characters obviously is something that was going to mean a lot to me personally, and I thought the beauty and the horror of Bashir, basically coming back to who he is, but through the shock of the death of Ezri was just terrible, but it perfect in the sense that it works and with that exactly scene the way it's supposed to.
And with that scene with Garrick, that was nice to have Garrick there.
Yes, exactly. And it's also this beautiful, just again, it's breaking your heart because in many ways, I think Bashir, with all that happened to him, I think the biggest regret of his life was what happens to him and Ezri, and the fact that they don't try harder. He doesn't try harder, to make that work. And, obviously he had his own path to go on with everything that happens with Section 31. But I think that, becomes an ultimate regret for him. And that loss, the way James wrote that, you felt it, and so, I wanted to ask you guys something, though, specifically here, because we're talking about the Deep Space Nine characters in The Ashes of Tomorrow, and one of the things that we don't get is some Deep Space Nine threads, like Rebecca. And so I wanted to throw out something to you guys, because I felt like that, to me, to utilize Rebecca, I think would have been really interesting, and to have her have to go with Kira, because she and the Hand of the Prophet need to be together to make the orb thing work, I think would have made a lot of sense. And I'm really surprised that they didn't pick up on this very easy way to utilize her and that storyline without having to add anything. Without having to add, and it would have been, can you just imagine how terrible the scene between, Sisko and his wife having to say goodbye to their daughter, knowing that she has to do her part? To me, I'm just like, wow, you guys, and they missed a huge opportunity, one, for story, to connect to the things that, David R. George III have been doing. But at the same time, they missed a scene that would have it would have destroyed you to read.
Well, because I think the last we hear from Cassidy and Rebecca are just a note that they made it onto a shuttle with Jake and his wife. And I almost feel like if Cassidy and Rebecca had been somehow with Kira, but then we could see a death of Cassidy, and then Rebecca has to go with Kira, and then maybe Kira gets a vision from the prophet saying that Rebecca needs to come with her to do this. I mean, like, they could have tied that in, but yeah, like, you're right. I think it's it was, I thought it was kind of strange how they just, not even how they didn't use Rebecca, but even just that the Sisko family was just kind of like, oh yeah, they got away. They're on their way to like Cestus 3 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and it didn't even matter in the end, right?
Yeah.
It like, that was one of the things I think, just in the series in general, there's a lot of fights that happen between, you know, the avatars and what are they called?
Nagas or Negas.
The Nagas. And, you know, there's a lot of battles, and it's a criticism I've seen other places. And I think it's actually true. There's too many places where that happens, and they're trying to get people away from them. But I'm thinking to myself, like, that legitimately doesn't matter. Like, whether or not Jake gets away with his wife, they're all going to die anyway. Everybody's going to die. It doesn't matter. So the emotional investment would have been more interesting in the sense of, like you said, Casey, like, what if Cassidy dies saving Rebecca's life, and then Rebecca, you know, Sisko has to send her off with Kira, you know? And to me, that's a much better storyline and utilizes the storylines that we had been going with in a way that works, I think, better. So I don't know. That just was something that, Bruce, you and I had talked about that, I think, when we both read this book and we were kind of talking together one day, and that's just something that's really stuck with me. I'm just surprised that they didn't think of it.
Oops. Yeah. You and I talked about this offline for a while. So going into this trilogy, that was probably one thing I was really hoping is to get something with Rebecca, because I become pretty good friends with David R. George III, and he and I do lunch together because he lives locally here. And every once in a while, I'd say, hey, you know, you kind of left things open with Rebecca at the end of Original Sin. You've got to write another novel. And he's like, I don't have another novel coming up. I'm like, but we got to have something. He goes, well, I don't need to write what happens next with Rebecca. Any of the authors can do that. And I thought, okay, this is the moment. We're going to get that. And then they didn't do it. But there's only so many characters they can do. And I think also because of Rebecca's age, I don't know if they would know how to string her along through the 3 books, because even James said, and I can't remember if it was on a show I was on with him or afterwards, but you know, he said aging Renee was necessary because they didn't want Renee to be the small kid throughout. It's easier to play with Renee in the situations with him being an adult. So I think that's why the direction they went to. And again, it's like I said earlier, if we never got this trilogy, I'd be okay with it. So I'm okay with not getting with any information about what happens to Rebecca afterwards. But yeah, it would have been cool to see her utilized because of her abilities. But, well, you know, you can only do so much.
They could even have had a future Rebecca come in. I mean, the first book had the Department of Temporal Investigations in it, which I don't think were mentioned after at all.
Yeah.
But, you know, they could have had a time-displaced Rebecca from the future come in and had an adult Rebecca, I guess, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just, I don't even remember how old she is, but I mean, she's like, what, 7, 8,
something
9?
like that,
something like that at this point, you know? So it's like, I mean, I feel like she's old enough. I mean, if Harry Potter's 11 and we could take in on Voldemort, you know, like Rebecca, you know, so.
Yeah, but they also focus more on the screen characters, right? I mean, I've heard some people complain about
absolutely,
that.
Absolutely. But my point though is that the legitimacy of doing this is really to pay off people who've been reading this stuff. Like, no, can we just be honest? Like, the small amount of people that actually read Star Trek books in the large scheme of things is probably like, what, 2% of fandom? I mean, in all reality. So like you're writing this for the 2%, you know? And so like, I'm just going to push back on that a little bit and say like, it's more about paying us off than it is anybody else who just picks this up, because we're the ones who care. We're the ones who invested, just as the authors were invested too. So, and it's not like they're the worst because they didn't think of this. It's just more of a like, I'm interested that they didn't try to think of a way to utilize that storyline, because it seemed like it would be pretty organic without actually having to do much different, really. You know, like, you don't really have to change very much at all, you know, and you're probably just adding one scene to the book where Sisko has to make the decision that to send off Rebecca with Kira, which again would just legitimately rip everyone's heart out. So, you know, it just seems like one more place to put the dagger in. I'm saying they didn't give me enough daggers. I needed one more.
Well, speaking of Sisko children, though, I would say that this book has one of the best Jake scenes ever, where Jake stands up and helps save the people to get on the shuttle.
Yeah, that was great.
On the shuttles. But yeah, I love Jake in this book.
Yep. 100%. One moment for him there to just kind of let him shine before he dies was great, you know, and to utilize something that Jake has never utilized before, which is, I'm the son of the emissary.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a thing Jake has ever done before. And I thought that was really cool. Was there anything else in The Ashes of Tomorrow that either of you guys can think of that you either, you know, liked or didn't like?
And there was a lot of little Easter eggs, I feel like. Some of them have been brought up on interviews, such as the someone is stealing the Enterprise scene. But there was also the scene where Tom Paris and Wesley meet, and there's this kind of pseudo recognition on Wesley's face, and Tom is like, I just got one of those faces.
Yeah.
I guess Matthew, if you're not watching Discovery, you wouldn't necessarily know about time crystals on Boreth.
No,
but that was alluded to, and they didn't ever say anything about the time crystals. But there was, I think they were talking about the caves or something. There was something they talked about they had to protect on Boreth, and that was from Discovery. There's a shuttlecraft Lorel, which is also Discovery.
I did catch that one. Yeah. So,
but and then California class ships, which that was actually great. I guess just kind of that was one of the harder deaths. I feel like was Nog. You know, he was he ended up being Captain Nog by the end because he kind of got captain the way Esri did by, I think he was like second officer or something like that, and it kind of got immediate promotion as the rest of his crew was dying, and then for him to give that ultimate sacrifice of staying on his ship to destroy those Nagas to save, I think it was the people evacuating Bajor. Was kind of a great way to end his character. I feel like just with the Starfleet through and through, I guess. But then, then as you guys mentioned, the with O'Brien staying behind to save Kira, that was just another ultimate sacrifice that an enlisted officer, he's not even an officer, he's just an enlisted man, and he's making that sacrifice to save Kira. Like, those were very well done, I thought.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And yeah, I mean, there are just so many good moments, I think, for the most part for me in this book. And I really, really liked it. So, well, I mean, Oblivion's Gate, final book in the series. And I guess the biggest question that I want to ask both of you, talked to David about this idea, but the Borg are back. And I don't know how you guys felt about that, about utilizing them one more time. So I can't wait to hear what you guys think.
Well, the Borg were back. It's all connected to First Contact. So that was the point of origin for the Splinter timeline. So I was okay with that, which made sense in some ways to bring the Borg back. You know what? I was like, okay, more Borg. We don't need more Borg. But I really liked it because we got to go to Earth when it was Borgified, which we've never done before. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah. I was like, oh, yeah, we've never seen anything like this before. That really actually did exist. And we're going to go visit Earth as it's been taken over by the Borg from First Contact. That was cool. And then the battle that Picard had with the Queen, she's like giant queen and all this stuff. I don't know why, but that scene just like I was so enthralled. I was so into that scene. It's just like, I just wanted Picard to just kick ass. Like, I was like so into it, more than I would ever expect. I really didn't think I'd be into it that much. So because of those things, I was okay with the Borg coming into this. After reading the book, it made me think about Destiny. It's like, well, we kind of redeemed the Borg in Destiny, and now we're bringing the Borg back as baddies here. Then in some ways, I kind of wish that because of the events of Destiny, we thought we saved the universe, but it would have been cool to find out that what we did in Destiny actually caused an issue that led to the events of Coda. That just when you thought you saved the universe, it actually had a devastating effect on things later. I thought that would have been cool to kind of thread that in there, but that would have, I guess, changed the whole story. But I was cool with the Borg. I was fine with it.
Yeah, I was fine with it because just the Borg are such a, I mean, as much as people think they're overused on TV and everything, I've never minded the Borg, and especially in the novels. And, you know, like you said, Bruce, like going to a Borgified San Francisco was pretty cool. And yeah, the giant Borg Queen, and even just the kind of, I mean, the whole, everything, I guess, that happened on the Borgified Earth was just very thrilling, I guess, that you know, because these are Borg that knew nothing of Starfleet, theoretically. Like, they knew Locutus, but they didn't know why they knew Locutus. And so, you know, somebody even says at some point, well, they're not, their shields won't necessarily adapt because they've never encountered Starfleet phasers before. So there's just a lot of newness to the Borg now that we haven't had before, because it was almost like meeting them again for the first time. And I think I would have been totally fine if the Borg weren't here, if they'd found some other way. I know that they had to go back even before Nemesis to kind of undo some of the things, like to kind of say where the splinter started. And I mean, the time jump in First Contact seemed like the most logical place, given that we saw it on screen. We saw the time travel on screen. We saw the Borgified Earth on screen. And so, yeah, again, like you said, Bruce, we see that on screen. We know that it exists. And so now to finally get to visit that kind of just made it pretty cool by the end of it.
Well, if anybody's ever read the book, I think Michael Jan Freeman wrote the book Planet X. When the Enterprise comes back through that vortex at the end of First Contact, they actually go into a dimension where they meet the X-Men. So I'm like, where are the X-Men in this book? We needed Wolverine.
Oh, man, that would have been cool.
That would have taken it down 1 star for me, I think.
Yeah, there you go. David Mack did not utilize the X-Men. How dare you? The Freeman universe. What happened to that? I get using the Borg again, and obviously, you know, having the conversation with David where we talked about them having to go back because the changes that they were kind of making in the timeline after, even before Nemesis had happened, with kind of the characters and all that kind of stuff, wasn't enough, right? You know, like and so First Contact became the pivot point, and I think it's fine. I don't think I was blown away by it, and I do feel like there's a part of me that is always just going to feel like, oh, it's just the Borg again. In all honesty, it's just where I am. But I do think it makes sense, and it's well done, and it's well written, and all of those things. Like, and I'm not. It doesn't thrill me, you know, like it just doesn't. So, and I guess I might have been more excited in some ways if they had just found a way to utilize the Davidians as the problem, but it's stemming from the same thing without necessarily having to revisit the Borg. But that's just me. So, yeah. Again, it doesn't kill anything for me. It's, you know, David does a great job with it, as he does with all his writing here. And I think he makes really the best of it. That's the thing, all of these authors did. They make the best of the situation. So, but another thing I'm really interested to talk to you guys about was the mirror universe aspect, because that's another thing. We've seen the mirror universe many times now, and we're back in it. And, in this way, the mirror universe kind of becomes the savior that our own Federation isn't in the 21st century in this Splinterverse. And that, I think, was really interesting to me. That was an interesting and an idea that I did not expect at all when the opportunity to visit the mirror universe again.
It was interesting that they explained how the mirror universe as we know it was really kind of a parallel universe to this first Splinter that we've been following, that it's kind of like two edges of a double helix, like that they kind of progressed together, and so that's why this universe was going to be destroyed as well. I wasn't super thrilled when I saw that we're going to the mirror universe, because that's another one, that I feel like has been done a lot, especially lately. And at first I didn't really, I guess, understand the reasoning behind it, except that they just needed a place to hide where the Davidians, or not the Davidians, where Riker wouldn't think to look for them. And I did like kind of the redemptive nature of them, as like you said, Matthew, that they kind of end up saving the Prime timeline, in the end with all their ships. But it occurred to me too, as I was reading, well, in the litverse, we've been exploring from time to time the mirror universe as well, which we don't know what's going to happen with that, on Picard or, any of the other shows, or even Discovery, really, like, with Emperor Georgiou. But so there is some aspects of the mirror universe stories that kind of need to get, for lack of a better term, undone by this story as well. So kind of giving them the opportunity to play a part, the people of that universe a chance to play a part in saving the Prime timeline was effectual, I guess, in the end.
I knew that the mirror universe was going to be in these books at some point. And there's even on one of the covers, I think on the second book, you can see like shattered glass, which I suspected at the time that might represent the mirror universe, that's more of a mirror breaking. And, But I don't know how I felt about them going to the mirror universe, because like Casey, you were saying like, oh, they went there to hide. So I thought, oh, well, that's a cool way to hide. Just go into another universe. But then you're going to the mirror universe. And I haven't read those books that David has done in the mirror universe. So when we get there and the mirror Picard isn't this badass evil Picard pirate type person like we're seeing in the IDW comics, and the other characters in the mirror universe, I came to really enjoy them. And they didn't come across as that one-dimensional, like, badass, characters, that these just felt like another Federation. And if anything, that really got me excited, because I haven't read those books. And even though this timeline has ended, it hasn't ended for me, because I want to go back and read the Mirror Universe books now. So that's what got me like excited, because I'm like, okay, well, as soon as I'm finished this, I'm going to go to the Mirror Universe books after I finish reading other books for podcast. Mm-hmm. When I get a chance, I'll get to them.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think we just found a series, got at least 2 books there that we haven't covered, that David Mack did. So yeah, we should do those, because I heartily agree. Man. And I'm glad that, like you said, Casey, that, and it was something I absolutely felt, but I think it ended up working much better for me than I thought it was going to. And part of that was that David was wrapping up the storyline that he had been creating for them, in the sense that setting in motion this entire chain of events for them to, basically basing it on the Foundation series, which I think is really cool, and works really, really well. And Foundation book series, not necessarily the TV series, which I haven't seen, but I've heard mixed reviews on, so that's a whole different story. But yeah, I think that was great, and I really, really liked that. And so, I guess I kind of come to it like everybody dies. You know, this is not, you know, that great Doctor Who episode, just this once, everybody lives. Like, no, everybody dies. You know, the joke where, you know, you're talking spoilers about a movie and you're like, oh, you don't want to see, everybody dies. And it's just a joke. No, this is not a joke. Everybody really does die. And a lot has been made of, and I've seen that the place where, you know, they don't see that there's hope in this series, and I gotta heartily disagree. You know, I don't understand this criticism at all. I mean, if you're reading this book series, it's full of hope, of people willing to do what it takes, the right thing to the very end, right? To make a difference. As Kirk says, you know, you're out there to make a difference, and while you're in that center chair, you can make a difference. And all of these characters make a difference. And they make a difference by saving a group of people who will literally never know they ever existed, but they still do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time. And to me, that's an incredible lesson of hope. And I was really struck by how great that is. So I don't know how you guys felt about it. For me, it really works.
Yeah, the whole storyline throughout this one, once Wesley, he kind of plays the Doctor Strange role in Endgame, where he sees all the various outcomes of this and realizes that their splinter universe must die in order to preserve the Prime universe. And there's a lot of questions around that, I guess, from the people involved of like, is this really the only way? Is there any way that we can live? But as each character comes to terms with what they must do, I mean, like I said before with Nog or Miles, like they're Starfleet through and through. They're going to do what they have to preserve whatever timeline they can. And they now know that, and they've accepted that theirs must die. And it doesn't mean any of them have to like that they all have to go on this suicide mission, essentially. But they know it's their duty. And I feel like that's one of the most Starfleet things that they could do, is protecting people who don't even know that they exist. And it makes some of the deaths that we see even more emotional. Like Sisko's in this one was just heartbreaking when Sisko died. And Bashir's reaction to that. And, you know, yeah, you can kind of go into it saying, well, we knew everyone was going to die, but it's like, you know, when you put it in, especially somebody like David Mack's hands, you know, he's going to make that an emotional journey, even though you know that Spock is going to die at the end of Star Trek 2, you know, like it's the journey that we go on to those deaths that kind of are what matters, and the heroics that our characters show along that way.
Yeah, because, they know they're going to die. I mean, there's no way out of it. So you either sit there and die, or you try to preserve yourself in that other timeline. You know, it's like they realize that Renee and Rebecca, any children that they've had since the events of First Contact may not exist in the Prime timeline. So they're going to see the death of their children because they may not even exist somewhere else, but yet they know that they themselves do still exist if they can preserve the Prime timeline. So to see them make the sacrifice to save it, but yet at the same time, how much of a sacrifice is it, because they know they're going to die already. So you might as well just get up and do it and make it happen. And because that's who they are, right? I mean, they're heroes. They're people that do this all the time. They're always trying to save others, and they're always trying to save the galaxy. And it's just the right fit. This is the right way for it to end. I kept expecting that there'd be some twist that goes, oh, whoa, wait, here we thought they were all going to die, but something happened and they didn't, and they'll live happily ever after, and we'll never revisit this timeline. And that didn't happen. And so they followed it through all the way.
Yeah. the really interesting thing here is that they are the Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
That's who they turn out to be. And, again, to me, I found hope in the idea of characters being willing to do the right thing, even to the bitter end, even if it meant they were still going to die. Like, they still were going to do the right thing. And I think that's inspiring. I think that's hopeful. I think we should all aspire to that, no matter the cost, that we would do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do. And these characters, in the end, they're still putting others before themselves. They're living up to the highest ideals of what Star Trek is, right? So I think that's really beautiful, and I love that, and I'm glad that was still, I think, a very big part of this series, and it came through to me. And the fact that I was really just shocked that I was seeing so many people not being able to see that, and how that's not hopeful. Because to me, that's the ultimate in hope. They're hoping for a better future still, even if they're not a part of it. And I think that's beautiful. So, well, I guess I wanted to ask kind of one of the final questions, which is just about the final product then. The Coda series, as we've talked through it and really had time to digest it all, we talked a little bit about, should this have happened, or, do we want this to happen, or, all of those kind of things. With what we got, are you glad it happened? Or do you find yourself wishing it hadn't?
I am glad it happened. And I think I said a little bit about that at the beginning, but yeah, I'm glad it happened because, first of all, I really enjoyed reading the trilogy. I did find it to be a page turner. Every time the book showed up on my porch, I grabbed it and started reading it almost immediately. And yeah, I'm glad it happened. Again, if we didn't get this trilogy, I'd be fine with it. But I do like the fact that it gives purpose to this timeline that can't be revisited because of the constraints of tie-in and how it works with the new Star Trek that's on screen. So it gives it a place within that context. It says, hey, this, and we now have a name for it, the first Splinter timeline. We now have this timeline, and it exists for a reason that leads up to these events that then saves the galaxy and saves the timeline that we watch on screen. And so it gives that purpose to this timeline, as opposed to people saying like, oh, it's just these other books, they don't even matter anymore. Well, they do matter, because even if all these events didn't occur in the prime timeline from the Time 2 series up to now, these are events that could happen. Some of these events could happen in the prime time because it's still the same characters. So it informs us of a direction that they might go into. So that to me is worth it too. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, yeah, I really did enjoy this. I also think as I was reading this, I kept pretending if I had never read any of the other books before, I think I could still enjoy this, because I'd go into this knowing this is an alternate timeline where our heroes from these series all of a sudden have to give up their lives to save what we know of. And I think I would have thoroughly enjoyed it without reading everything else.
Well, that's a great segue into, I haven't read all of the things, all of the stories leading up to this. I've only really gotten through the Typhon Pact, so I haven't read Cold Equations. So, I mean, I knew that Data came back, but that's about all I knew. And, a lot of the storylines I didn't know. And so any of the references back to previous stories, there would be a brief moment where I'd be kind of scratching my head going, I don't understand what's going on. And then literally like the next paragraph would explain briefly the events that I needed to know to get caught up, and I was back on my way. And so I feel like this is if somebody's interested in reading Star Trek novels, and, I think they could pick up this trilogy and be just fine and get a great story out of it. And I feel like I'm really glad that the authors were allowed to do these books, because I know that CBS could have come in and said, you know what, no, we got new Star Trek on TV, we're cutting you down, like we're cutting you off, wherever your last books were, and we're not going to go forward anymore. But I'm glad they did, because one, anytime we get to read these authors especially, but really any new Star Trek book is great. I don't want those to go away, but then also, just getting closure on some of these stories. I am happy, like that there is a finite end to this, I guess. And I will never have to worry or wonder, are they ever going to conclude such and such storyline? Well, I know here that this is the end. There's
this
no
is
more
the ultimate
conclusions.
closure.
Yeah. I mean, you could, I suppose, like if they were allowed to, they could go back in and write that Rebecca story or something, that just kind of fills in a gap somewhere. But ultimately, I'm glad that these books came out, kind of close off 2021 with a bang on Star Trek novels, and hoping to see more from these authors in the future for sure.
I'm glad you mentioned about the permission to do these books, because as we were talking about earlier in the show about Star Wars Legend, that permission was never given from their end. Where here we have the three authors that stepped up that wanted to do this. CBS Licensing agreed to it. Simon Schuster agreed to it. So, big applause and thank you to all parties who allowed this to happen. I think that's totally awesome. I've had that thought too, but I've never expressed that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I think that for myself, I'm a little bit more mixed in the sense that there's things that I'm glad that happened in the series, and there's things that I'm not glad. There's good and bad, right? It's a mixed bag. And I mean, I think that is to be expected with this kind of series. And, and really, and I mean this in the highest form of praise, I think the authors did the best they could with what they had to work with, which is 3 books trying to bring an end to something that has been going for 20 years. It's a tall order, and I think they do a dang good job of it. And, and I think having known them all for a really long time now, since like 2012, 11, it's been a long time at this point that I've been talking to them. I know how much this means to them and how much of their heart and soul they pour into this. I mean, our interview with David, him talking about the ultra personal nature of this book series for him and what it meant for him and how difficult some of the parts were to write for him because of what he was going through. How there were parts of this that he couldn't even write because it was so personal. Like he couldn't write certain scenes because that would be too much, Like these authors really care. And I think that shows on every single page. And so regardless of whether or not I loved everything about it, or it all works for me, okay. I think it is a good love letter to this part of Star Trek. And, it's a damn better love letter than Enterprise got. So, I'll forever be happy with that. But, it's good and bad, and that's to be expected when something ends, right? Regardless of what it is. And so I think that's the thing, is that like the characters getting sacrificed on the altar of, canon, that's going to hurt some people. It's going to hurt. And I think the fact that it hurts means that the authors, I think, did a good job. Well, gentlemen, I am delighted that we got a chance to talk about this and to do this together and kind of just do this roundtable in many ways, almost like a therapy session, I feel like. to get through the end of the litverse, and it's been a lot of fun. But we'll be continuing Literary Treks this year. We got some great things coming up for everybody. We're going to be diving into some fun series. We've already promised, I guess, here on the show that we're going to do some of those Mirror Universe books as well. And we got some other fun surprises coming up, as well as the new books that'll be coming out that we'll be covering. But before we get to all of that, Casey, if people wanted to catch up with you and talk to you about, Coda or anything else, Star Trek related or elsewise, where can they find you?
Well, I am available pretty much anywhere on at Knitting Trekkie. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, Letterboxd, all those ones. And then I'm usually lurking around in the Babel Conference as well. I'm also on another podcast called Mickey's Marvels, where we talk about everything under the Disney umbrella, including Star Wars and Marvel, since they were acquired.
Nice. Yes, since they own everything now. Just wait till they own Star Trek, too. Yeah. So, well, Bruce, if people do want to catch up with you and see what you've got going on, where can they find you?
Well, I'm also on Goodreads. I'm glad you mentioned that, Casey, because I forget to mention that. So yeah, look for me on Goodreads, but also on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. It's Admiral with the underline Rex. And I'm occasionally on the Star Wars Report podcast, which Matt has also been on. And I do a podcast with Dan Guthrie called Positively Trek, where we talk about the series, the books, the comics, the movies, the action figure that came out last, whatever it is, we're talking about it there.
And, of course, you could find me all over the place under the name MattRushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero. I'm on Goodreads as well. Of course, as is the show, you can find the Goodreads group. You can also find me here on the network on our whole other side of the network called the 602 Club, where we're talking about every fandom that we love, not just Star Trek. And, of course, they've got the bonus shows in there with Snyder Cuts, as well as Assembling Avengers. And then I'm also doing the Orb and Warp 5. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. Over on the Nerd Party Network, you can find me doing two shows. One is a completed show I did with Drea Kaufman called Owl Post. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then last but not least, over on Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.